Hi, I'm Tim Gillingham, your host for Gold Tips Aero University. Okay, in this segment, we're going to cover understanding penetration. We're going to give you a little bit better insight on penetration and what we feel like are the most important criteria in penetration. Now, a lot of people would like you to believe that you need an 800 grain arrow and a two-blade broadhead to get any type of penetration, when in fact the majority of us with good shot placement and a decent broadhead design usually pass through about all the animals that we shoot at. Now, there are big popularity in large diameter broadheads nowadays, and of course penetration is lost, and all of a sudden the first knee-jerk reaction somebody has is, I need a heavier arrow. Or the whitetail hunter comes from out east and he calls us and he's like, I'm going elk hunting, I need a heavier arrow. When in fact maybe he should be looking in a different direction. Now, what I consider probably the 5 most important factors of penetration is this. Number 1 being shot placement. Shot placement is ultra critical. Number 2, broadhead design. Number 3, arrow flight. How straight does that arrow hit that animal? And then weight and diameter come into play somewhere around 4th and 5th. But they're not nearly as critical as people, make them out to believe. Now, let's go back to the top there, okay? Shot placement. Okay, shot placement is key. If you hit an animal right behind the shoulders, that should be our key. We should be looking for an accurate setup that allows us to achieve that. Everybody wants to shoot through the shoulder blade of an elk. It's not going to happen, so you should try to strive to pick a setup that's going to allow you to achieve the best amount of accuracy possible. Speed comes into that equation. A lot of times in the hunting woods, we're dealing with shooting animals sitting in a tree stand. We're shooting through small holes in the brush. A little more speed's going to help us there. And even though we have laser rangefinders nowadays, a lot of times we don't have time to use them precisely. We may have ranged a spot here and a spot there, but when that animal comes through and everything's happening fast, we may be off by 2 or 3 yards. And a little more speed's going to help that. That 800 grain arrow doing 220 feet per second, that's going to make that 2 or 3 yard miss pretty rough. So, I like personally to keep my arrow speeds over 280 feet per second. I personally like 300 to 310 feet per second. So, with as heavy of an arrow as I can shoot. So let's look at some of the broadhead designs in the second part of that and see how they affect penetration. Everything you're going to find realistically is going to come back to the number 1 criteria, which is shot placement. Okay. Now, broadhead design, very touchy subject. There's a lot of people that make good broadheads out there. But the main thing you want to look at is how much energy am I pushing, okay? If I'm shooting 55 pounds, I probably don't want to go trying to shove a 2-inch broadhead, something like a Rage or, like a Killzone, through an elk and expect good results. A big broadhead like this Epic here, it's got 1.5 inch cut in diameter 3-blade. You're going to need some pretty substantial energy to start punching that through animals. So keep that in mind when you're coming out west. If you want to shoot your whitetail rig and you still want to shoot 62 pounds for elk, maybe you should choose something like this Thunderhead. You notice it has a much more sloped cutting design. It's got a nice leading trocar tip. It's going to zip through a lot easier. Something like a Striker here, same type of a deal. On my wife's setup, for example, she shoots 42 pounds. I would tend to lean towards a fixed blade broadhead because she's only shooting 260 feet per second anyway. So a fixed blade broadhead is going to give her very good accuracy, but on top of that, it's going to give her very good penetration. Okay. If I decide, hey, I like 2-blade Rages, or I like the Killzone head, I shoot a 2-inch Killzone, or maybe I even shoot a bigger Killzone head, but I want to go elk hunting. Maybe I just simply need to pick a different Killzone like this 1.5 inch cut in diameter. This 1.5 inch cut in diameter will create a lot less drag going through, still be adequate to shoot and kill any animal in the North American continent, but you're going to get better penetration. So choosing the proper broadhead is probably more critical than you might think. Now let's move on to the third aspect of penetration. Third aspect of penetration is arrow flight. Now, if you're a finger shooter, for example, and it takes 20, 30 yards for your arrow to recover because you made a poor finger release, you're going to lose a lot of energy. And this was much more true when we were dealing with older aluminum arrows. A carbon arrow, on the other hand, recovers very quickly, and therefore you get better penetration. Better penetration also comes from a stiffer arrow. So good flight out of a good stiff carbon arrow is going to give you better penetration. I try to use the analogy a lot of times of a spike maul. I used to work on the railroad, and we used to drive railroad spikes in with a spike maul. And the spike maul had, it had one end on it, probably about as big as this canister, and the other end was, probably around this big. And if you could drive that spike in, if you could hit that spike dead in the center with that small end, it would drive that, that spike in a little bit faster, okay? But if you made ever so slight of a glancing blow, you would have been better off using the larger end, which give you a better surface area dissipation of that energy. Okay, the same thing kind of plays true when you're dealing with arrows. Okay, if I'm taking an arrow like this kinetic here, it's a little bit smaller diameter than, say, a velocity. Okay, this is going to present a larger target for the power stroke of my string, therefore making it a little bit easier to tune, making it a little bit easier to, probably a little faster to recover. And as a rule, you're going to get a little bit better results out of it, I think. But if you're a good bow mechanic and you're a good shot, the smaller diameter arrows, may benefit you slightly in the long run, especially at longer distances where you're losing less speed. So if you're going to shoot an mule deer and antelope at 70 and 80 yards, you might want to choose a smaller, heavier arrow that's going to maintain its energy downrange. Okay. But not at the expense of losing speed. If you drop, say you want to shoot a 700 grain arrow, it may drop your speed down around, 220 or 230 feet per second. Now we go from, a yard miss being this much at 290 to 300 feet a second to a yard miss being this much. So you can see the difference. Shot placement is key in all aspects. I hope this kind of helps you understand and give you a little bit different insight on penetration. If you shoot two different arrows that are, one's heavier, one's lighter, they still have fairly equal amounts of kinetic energy. And shot placement and broadhead design, I think, are going to be the two biggest keys in determining what type of results you have from that shot.